Good morning to all. Welcome to this channel. In the previous two videos, discussions were on different aspects of hypothesis. In this video, I am planning to discuss on testing of hypothesis. Before going into testing of hypothesis, we will see what is statistical inference. Statistical inference is a process through which inferences are drawn about a population based on certain statistics calculated from a sample of data drawn from that population. That is, it's a process by which conclusions or inferences are drawn about a population based on sample drawn from that population. When we do a study, we do a sample study. We take a portion of the population, that is sample, and do the study. Because the population is very large, it is difficult to study the whole population. Lot of limitations are there: time, energy, money. Lot of problems are there to study the whole population. For that, what we do, we take representative samples from the population, study the sample, and the results obtained from the sample study is applied to the population. That is called the statistical inference. That is, inferences are drawn about a population based on the sample drawn from that population. Statistical inference are of two types. One is testing of hypothesis and other is estimation. Here in this video, we will go in depth regarding testing of hypothesis. Testing of hypothesis is used to reach conclusions about a population by examining a sample of that population. We want to talk about the larger population from which the subjects are drawn, not that particular subjects or particular sample. It is a process. Testing of hypothesis is a process by which a statistical hypothesis is laid down and it is accepted or rejected on the basis of random sample drawn from that population. So, in order to do the testing of hypothesis, the first step is we have to transform the research question into a statistical hypothesis. Then what is statistical hypothesis? Statistical hypothesis is a statement about the nature of a population. It is often stated in terms of a population parameter. That is, it's a mathematical statement about a population parameter and evaluated by appropriate statistical technique. So, here in the statistical hypothesis, we make an assumption about a population parameter. This assumption may or may not be true. So, statistical hypotheses are of two types: null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. We will see what is null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis. Null hypothesis is a statistical hypothesis that is to be tested. It's a statement about the population parameter, usually stated for the purpose of possible acceptance. Null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between two population parameters, that is between an independent variable and dependent variable, or between variables. Null hypothesis can be tested to conclude whether or not a relationship exists between variables, usually denoted by H0 or H0. Then alternative hypothesis is used to show that the observations of an experiment are due to some real effect. It indicates that there is a statistical significance between two possible outcomes and it can be denoted as H1 or HA. So, it is an alternative to the null hypothesis. Any hypothesis other than null hypothesis is alternative hypothesis, H1 or HA. Then we will see what are the steps in testing of statistical hypothesis. As a first step, we state the null hypothesis H0 and alternative hypothesis HA or H1 clearly on a population parameter. Then collect data to test the hypothesis. Perform an appropriate statistical test. So based on the data available, appropriate statistical test has to be done. Specify the level of significance or value of alpha. Define the test statistic. I will explain what is test statistic. Calculate the value of the test statistic on the basis of the given sample. Compare it with the critical value, that is the table value. Decide whether to reject or fail to reject null hypothesis. That is, reject null hypothesis at specified level of alpha if the calculated value is more than the table value. To make it simpler, statement of H0 and H1, collect data, perform an appropriate statistical test, specify the level of significance, compute the value of test statistic, and make decision. That is whether to reject or not to reject a null hypothesis. Then what is a test statistic? A test statistic is a mathematical measure under the null hypothesis. It is the value obtained to decide whether to reject or not to reject a null hypothesis. Value of a test statistic is calculated on the basis of sample observation, assuming the null hypothesis to be true. The calculated test statistic value is then compared with the critical value or table value and decision is made. So, from the sample observation, we get a value through by doing a statistical test appropriate to the sample we have selected, and the obtained value maybe it can be a t value, f value, z value, chi-square value. This is compared with the critical value and decision is made. That is the test statistic. To make it simpler, I will explain this with an example. The research question is, what is the relationship between gender and body mass index? So, a hypothesis is formulated. Women have more BMI than men. Women have more body mass index than men. To test this hypothesis, H0 null hypothesis and HA alternative hypothesis are stated. H0, women do not have more BMI than men. HA, women do have more BMI than men. In order to test this, we have to collect data. To test this hypothesis, we have to collect data, that is body mass index of men and women. So in order for the data to be true representative of the population, we have to go for probability sampling. So the data should be true representative of the population, so that we make statistical inferences about the population. Here population is men and women. So probability sampling is adopted. Our objective is to test the differences in average BMI between men and women. For that, the sample selected should have an equal proportion of men and women. Equal proportion of men and women. For example, if the total population of men and women capital N is 1000, of which the number of men are 600 and number of women are 400. To get an equal proportion according to the population available for men and women, we have to calculate the proportion. That, for example, if the sample size required is 200, so 1000 total population, sample size required for our study is 200. The proportion of men, that is the men, number of men is 600 and number of women is 400. You have to calculate the proportion of men and women required. So the total number of men by total population into sample size required. That is 600 divided by 1000 into 200. Total number of men required for our study is 120. Same way, 400 women, total population 1000, sample size required is 200, 400 divided by 1000 into 200, that is 80. So 120 men and 80 women are required for our study to make it as 200. So thus we make an equal proportion of men and women. Again, we have to control many extraneous variables here because BMI is affected by many other factors, mainly the activity level, exercise pattern, socio-economic class, occupation, comorbidities. Like that, many variables may or might influence body mass index. So all these variables are to be controlled. Then we have to, then next step is we have to uh, do the appropriate statistical test. Appropriate statistical test has to be done. Here, because we are comparing two means, we can do an independent t-test. Specify the level of significance, that is the alpha value. Mostly it is taken as 5% level, 0.05 level for rejecting the null hypothesis. Calculate the value of test statistic. That is, the statistical test is based on the type of data collected. Compare the obtained value, obtained t value, the t value we obtained with the critical value or the table value. So here, comparison of mean BMI between men and women. We have done a t-test and the obtained t value is compared with the critical value or table value. If the calculated value is more than the table value, reject the null hypothesis. That means our null hypothesis is women do not have more BMI than men. Reject the null hypothesis. So that is how we do testing of hypothesis. Hope it is clear to you with this example. Then hypotheses are never proved or disproved through testing. They are accepted or supported. Findings are always tentative. Hypotheses are tested, not proven. Hypothesis, we know, it's an educated guess, or it is an assumption that can be tested with observations. It cannot be proved to be true because it's generally not possible to investigate all possible cases. Our study, the result is this. So we decide whether the obtained value is more than the table value or not. Based on that, we decide whether to reject the null hypothesis or not to reject the null hypothesis. So it can never be proved correct. Hope it is clear to you. inviting your suggestions and comments. Thank you.